Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod here to talk about Michigan State's upcoming game against the UCLA Bruins in Los Angeles on Tuesday night. MSU is coming off a humbling 6-point loss to USC to break the 13-game win streak and their unblemished Big Ten record. Now sitting at 9-1, MSU has to regroup and bounce back against one of the most storied programs in college basketball history. Special thanks to Ben Kozar, who joined our Scott Skiles supporters on Patreon. Really appreciate it. Thanks so much, Ben. If you'd like to join the ranks of awesome supporters for the show and keep pressing forward with content, head on over to our support page at tffinots.com, where you can find /support, where you can find ways to contribute via PayPal or Venmo, or on a recurring basis on Substack or Venmo. Please be sure to, Patreon. Please be sure to subscribe and like this show. As Michigan State goes in, they have to bounce back now, obviously, after the loss to USC. We have found that Rod here has some trouble. I guess the last time you saw Michigan State in person was at Chrysler a couple years ago.
Yeah.
So you've now watched them twice in person lose. So we're not going to blame the loss on you, but I don't know. It's a little suspicious. That's all I'll say.
Yeah.
Hopefully things turn around here pretty soon. So Michigan State, like I said, it's going to be playing Mick Cronin and this UCLA Bruins on Tuesday night. UCLA is 16-6 overall, 7-4 in the Big Ten. After starting the season 2-4 in the Big Ten, they've run off 5 in a row, all on the West Coast. And on offense, they're number 46 overall, but they've been better recently. They're 79th from twos and 110th from threes. They're 96 in turnover percentage, so they're not very, in offensive rebounding. Turnover percentage are 138th, so they're not great there. And they also don't get to the line a whole lot. They're 133rd in getting to the line and shoot poorly when they're there, at only 70%. So their offensive profile is not great, but of course, as of late, it's changed. It's been a little bit better.
Over the 5-game win streak, I think two things have changed. One is they're shooting 40% plus from three. So that's significantly better than their seasonal percentage. The other thing is they've had the emergence of their 7-3 center, Adam Barra, over this stretch. And he's not Zach Edey because he's not that big, not that bulky. So he's not able to hold position the way Edey could. But the problem with this kid is that he gets the ball, near the rim, he's going to finish. And 7-3 is there are times when he's unguardable. He's getting the right spots. You have to do your work early with him and keep him away from the spots he wants to be in. I think that's the trick. He's also impacting games defensively. He just recently had back-to-back games of 5 blocks. That's pretty impressive. His seasonal numbers, as we're going to talk about in a minute, are not nearly that impressive. Averaging double digits over this 5-game win streak in scoring and making an impact defensively. But I think a lot of that is a function of his just being able to stay on the floor for longer periods. He's getting more minutes, and so the opportunities are there for him to make an impact. But it's definitely changed UCLA. So I think those two things are what you've got to keep in mind with them on offense. Their seasonal profile is not tremendously impressive, but they may be a different team now than they were for the bulk of the season.
Right. I mean, we've talked about this in respect to Michigan State with the 3-point shooting. Yes, it's not great even now, but it's certainly much better than it was earlier in the season.
Mm-hmm. And it could get significantly better at some point in the remainder of the season. They're capable. If you told me that at some point the rest of the way they're going to have a 5-game streak where they're at 40% plus, I'd believe it.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, it can happen. And the question with UCLA is this them on a heater, or are they just fundamentally, like the rest of the way, going to be a different team offensively?
Yeah.
That's the question.
Right. I mean, we see teams streaky all the time. We saw Minnesota rattle off 3 in a row, lose to Michigan State. Now they just lost at home to Washington. So, teams kind of go up and down. So Mick Cronin obviously known more for his defense, and that UCLA was very good defensively. Although they're kind of a strange defensive profile. They're number 5 in the nation in creating turnovers. They're 28th in steal percentage, so very good. But they're only 201st against the twos, 109th against the threes. Defensive rebounding is 109th, which is not very good. Michigan State's in the mid-30s, given a comparison. And also they foul a ton. They're 288th in defensive foul rate. So you wouldn't expect to be for a good defensive team.
The profile is not that of a good defensive team. So what that tells you is that they are incredibly dependent upon turnover creation. They're number one in non-steal turnovers. Now, some of that could be luck, but I do think some of that is actually a result of the kind of defense they're playing, and they're pressuring teams into travels and double dribbles, that kind of thing. So they're really good there, but they have to be good there because it's been proven that if you can survive that and actually get a shot up, you got a really good chance of making it. I mean, to be sub 200 against twos, that's not good. Now,
Yeah.
maybe Mara playing a bigger role now is going to help that a little bit, but it's still over the course of the season, it's been a problem. So you're going to have success if you get a shot up, and then even if you miss, they're not a great defensive rebounding team, and they foul a ton. So it's a weird team. Like their overall defensive standing is pretty good. They're top 20, but it's not the profile of what we expect to see in the Big Ten typically, which has not historically been a heavy pressure league. Teams that are good defensively in the Big Ten tend to be much in one way or another along the Michigan State model. That the idea is we're not going to take chances, we're not going to take a lot of risks. We're going to play solid defense and force you to take a shot that you don't want to take. And then we're probably going to rebound that miss. That's the formula. You think about teams that have been good defensively at Purdue, Wisconsin, on and on and on. Michigan, they were good defensively. That's the profile. UCLA is not that. So it's kind of a different animal.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think you see this with statistical anomalies that you see a team that may just be ultra elite in one thing. It may be enough to drive up the rest of the ratings, right? Like
absolutely
shoot 50% from three. Well, you don't have to shoot good free throws percentage, or, you can turn the ball over a bunch and still survive.
It's just that I would say this, and UCLA is not like they're a pressure defense, but they're not a full tilt. They're not full court pressing all 40 minutes. It's not Nolan Richardson 40 minutes of hell stuff. But it's the kind of thing that strikes me as a little less sustainable on a game-to-game basis than, say, what Michigan State does. It's when you're relying on that. And the reason I say that is you are likely going to run into teams where the guard play is good enough that they're just not going to turn it over very much, no matter what you throw at them in terms of pressure. That will happen. And if you can't then rely on just being able to guard people on the half court solidly for 25 seconds or whatever it is, you got a problem. So I don't know. We'll see. But when you drill down into UCLA, it's kind of a weird profile. And that's not really, Mick Cronin teams have typically not been exactly this. So it's a little bit surprising to me, but that's what we find.
Finally, this slow team in general, that UCLA plays a slow pace. They are 296th in overall tempo, which of course is well near the bottom of Division I basketball. They're 236 in average length of offensive possession. And so it's not the slowest team Michigan State has seen, but it's certainly very on the slower end. And I think probably more interesting, and I know we talked about this in the past, and I got asked in the Graham Couch's show, is, the Mick Cronin and after where they went through that big losing streak, he had an explosion in the media about his team. And I guess, there was a lot of controversy when that came out, how the team would respond to their predicament.
Yeah, and I think we've got some evidence as to how that worked out.
Yeah.
He had that outburst after a home court loss to Michigan, in which they were embarrassing the way they played. He was right. Everything he said in that outburst, where he called his team soft and he said, I can't be the toughest guy in the gym, and way too often that's exactly how it is. All that stuff. Absolutely right. If you watch that game, Michigan got out to a big lead. UCLA then fought their way back, actually took the lead, and then collapsed. And Michigan ended up winning by 18. And everything he said it looked exactly right if you watch that game. And he took a ton of criticism for it. Because in the modern era, you're not supposed to say that about players. You're not supposed to call anybody soft. You had people say, oh, he's going to lose his team. He's never going to be able to recruit a kid again. All of this stuff. People like me are saying, he's whatever you want to say. I don't think Mick Cronin's the best coach in the country, but I think he's a pretty good one. And he's been doing it long enough that I've got to believe he thinks these are the right buttons to push with his team. So what happens? They had played a game at Nebraska, they lost, flew home to LA with like a 2-day turnaround to play Michigan and lost. And then they were right back on a plane to fly out and face Maryland at Maryland at College Park. And predictably, they got beat. And by the way, they would have gotten beat in that game no matter what had happened prior to it. That was the epitome of a scheduling loss. But a lot of people who had pitchforks out, but see, look what's happened. And then they stayed out east and played and lost a game against Rutgers at Rutgers. See, he's lost his team. Well, they've won 5 straight since then. So I would say there's at least some decent evidence that he did know what he was doing. And he did know his team. And he knew he wasn't going to lose his guys when he said something like that it was going to have the intended effect. We'll see where it ends up. I mean, I do think they've probably got too big a hole dug to realistically win the Big Ten because they've still got a couple more trips east left to go. And it is fair to note that this win streak has all happened in the Pacific time zone. Their 2 road games were at USC and at Washington, I believe, and then they played 3 games at Pauley. So that's help. And I think the East Coast trips probably mean they're going to lose, at least 2 or 3 more. And so that probably takes them out of any realistic Big Ten title talk. But I do think they've still got a chance to be a top 4 finisher and get double bye in the Big Ten tournament. And I think they could be well positioned to go on a good run in March. I think it's a very good team. It's got a lot of interesting parts. And the biggest thing, and the thing I like most about them probably is they are the other team besides Michigan State that can truly claim to be 10 deep in this league.
Mm-hmm.
Like they can go 10 deep legit. All 10 guys can play. Like you look at who their 9th and 10th men are, and you're like, those guys are good players. Same way it is for Michigan State. So that will help. That will help them navigate the rest of the schedule with those 2 tough trips still looming. And I think get to March and still be in good shape to hopefully for them play their best basketball. It's a tough assignment. It's a tall order.
Yeah, sure. Well, you also wonder if that helps them a little bit in the Big Ten tournament. Not that people care quite as much about that, but certainly 1-day turnarounds and not playing as many minutes throughout the regular season. You might have a little fresher legs by come March.
Where it helps is that you're not burning, no matter how deep you go, you're probably not burning your team out, which is what the Brad Underwoods of the world worry about, right? You're not gonna have to worry about that if you're Mick Cronin or Tom Izzo. You're gonna be okay if you got to play 3 games in 3 days.
I just figured Underwood was more concerned with the refs, but maybe I'm mistaken.
He's got a lot of those kind of concerns that don't have anything to do with winning or losing.
So we'll talk about the opposing lineup and the player to keep in the gutter, brought to you by the Brothers Just Gutters. Friends, I'm here in sunny Southern California looking out my window at a bunch of bamboo. My wife's back home in Grand Rapids. She said she's looking out the window at another 3 to 4 inches of snow. I feel a little bit bad and guilty that she was out shoveling snow. But that's just the way it goes. Sometimes some people just got to do the hard work here and soldier through. But we, of course, have gutters in Michigan because we have lots of water, whether it's in the frozen sort or if it's actually wet and just liquid. You make sure it stays away from your house. You want to have a good gutter system, or even it's your business. So make sure you contact the Brothers Just Gutters. They're the ones who are experts. So all they do is just gutter work. They can repair things, you replace them. They can put leaf guards on so you don't have to get up there on your ladder and clean things out. So they'll take care of that so you don't have to worry about it. You get 10% off as a listener to the show if you mention Final Four when you get your estimate. You can find that at our support page where you can find everything at tffinots.com/support. So begin at the lineup for the starters for UCLA. We'll start with Sky Clark. He's 6'2", junior point guard. He's, I think most notoriously, he started at Illinois, then did a year at Louisville, and now he's out in Los Angeles. He's averaging 7.1 points a game on 44, 37, and 71 shooting. He's also leading the team in leads the team in assists and steals, and he has a 2.5 to 1 assist turnover ratio. So good point guard.
Yeah, he's fine. I'll give him credit. I mean, I got to be honest. I was completely ready to bury Sky Clark. Sky Clark originally committed to Kentucky. He was a very typical, highly rated John Calipari recruit. And then he got hurt. The story was he didn't recover particularly well, and Kentucky sort of cut him loose. They didn't say that. It was spun as well. He decommitted and not my understanding is Kentucky said, "Hey, this isn't going to work." They weren't convinced he was their caliber player. And he was flat out terrible at Illinois, and he left mid-season, if you remember.
Yeah.
and aborted in a year where they needed a point guard. It was not good. And so he ended up at Louisville, and it was okay, but not on was on a terrible, historically bad Louisville team. So when he transferred to UCLA, my thinking was, this is a joke. This guy can't play, and he's proven me wrong. I mean, he's not having a spectacular year, but he is a very capable part of this team. He's given them, reasonably solid play at the point. He's not fantastic there, but he's solid. Solid defensively for what they want to do. He can create turnovers, and he shot the ball reasonably well. So he's a nice piece. I got to give credit where it's due. It surprises me, but those are the facts.
Yeah. Next is Dylan Andrews, 6'2" junior. He's a returning player from UCLA, one of the few. He's averaging 43, 35, and 67 shooting and 8 points a game.
Yeah, a little bit of a disappointment because he was really good last year. And in contrast to Clark, I thought Dylan Andrews would be a good player this year. But, it's funny. UCLA, it was a heavy roster turnover. Last year, Cronin went heavily, particularly on European freshmen, and it didn't really work. So a couple of these guys are at other schools in the Big Ten this year. There's a lot of roster turnover, but there were some guys who stuck it out. And Andrews was, I thought, probably positioned to be the best player on this team. He has not been that. The three-point shooting maybe hasn't been quite as good as they thought. He sort of shared point guard duties a bit with Clark, but he hasn't been great there either. To his credit, lately he's been playing better, so we may still see the best of him. But at his high end, he's a capable guard for sure.
Is Buteman Joe, or what is the guy? Was he one of the UCLA players? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, over at Nebraska. Yeah. All right. So next would be Kobe Johnson, 6'6" transfer from crosstown USC. He's averaging 8 points a game and 5.5 rebounds a game, shooting 47, 37, and 70. And he also leads the team in assist to turnover ratio at 2-1.
Yeah, he has been a great addition. And the USC people, the 10 of them that care about basketball,
we saw both, 2 dozen yesterday.
Yeah,
so.
about. We're very upset for obvious reasons. I mean, your kid's been at USC a few years and transferred to UCLA. That's not going to go over well. But boy, he's been a good addition for UCLA. I mean, the scoring numbers aren't huge, but he's a pretty good shooter, and he just does everything else well. They can run offense through him. He's a disruptive defender. He's their leading rebounder, and he's their most versatile and I would say their most consistent defensive player at 6'6". So he's a really important part of their team and a great addition.
Next is Eric Daly Jr., 6'8", sophomore transfer from Oklahoma State, averaging 12.4 points a game, 4.3 rebounds a game on 54, 39, and 75 shooting.
Yeah, he kind of had a little bit of an inconsistent start, but you look at his seasonal numbers, and I think they're at the high end of what was realistic to expect. They were very excited to get him. See, he played as a freshman at Oklahoma State. He was a very good player on a bad team. And, as I say, it was considered an important get for them. But for him to be the kind of offensive player he's been, I think has been really important. He's been a great addition, and assuming they can keep him, he can be a multi-year player.
And finally, to round out the starting five, we have Tyler Bilodeau, 6'9", senior transfer from Oregon State, former Pac-12 rival. He leads the team in scoring at 14 points a game, 4.7 rebounds a game, and shooting 51, 41, and 71.
Yeah, very dangerous player and a very tough cover. 6'9", he's about 235, 240. So he's big enough and strong enough that he can do damage in the post, but he is a weapon as a stretch. And between he and Daly, who's the 4, who's the 5, it kind of varies some. I've just nominally put him at the 5, but he can play the 4 just as easily.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to be tough for Michigan State to deal with because when he's on the floor, you've got to be conscious of him at all times as a perimeter weapon. I mean, you see it, 41% from 3, and that's not on small volume. He takes a lot of those shots and he makes a lot of those shots, and yet he's also capable of doing some damage around the rim. So you got to give it to Mick Cronin. I mean, the job he did in the portal this year, very, very high level stuff. It's pretty much everybody he's added has played a part in this, and Bilodeau as much as anybody.
So moving to reserves, we can start with Sebastian Mack, 6'4" sophomore, returning player out of Chicago, averaging 10 points a game on 42, 30, and 76 shooting.
Dynamic offensive player. He is, as opposed to a lot of these other guys with pretty decent 3-point numbers, you see he's not shooting all that well.
Right.
Although he can hit it. But he is a downhill kind of guy. He's athletic. He's got good size at 6'4", tough cover when he gets it rolling. The negative about Mac is that he has shown an occasional propensity to get outside of himself, either fall in love with bad shots, make bad decisions. And Mick Cronin he's talked about it during the course of this year. I've seen him in a couple situations, even situations where they won games and he benched Mac. So you don't always know which Sebastian Mack you're going to get. But the best version of him, very difficult to do.
Then we move on to the previously mentioned Adai Mara. He's a 7'3" sophomore from Spain, averaging 6 points a game, 3.8 rebounds a game, shooting 63% from the floor, 54% from the line. But as you mentioned before, although he's averaging 1.5 blocks per game, that's over all the games played so far, but he had 10 just in the last 2 games.
Well, it was actually not the last game. It was the 2 before that.
Oh, okay.
Went for 5, 2 straight. Yeah, those seasonal numbers tell one story, but what he's done in this recent streak is another story. And you have to assume that you're more likely to get the more recent version. He's playing very well. They're concerned about him. His strength is not great, and conditioning means that you can't just play him for 30 minutes. But
right.
He's been much improved. Michigan State's going to have a figurative and literal tall order to deal with. Now they've got cards they can play, but you think about Zapala. Okay, you got a 7-footer. Carson Cooper's 6'11". Book is 6'11". Yeah, you've got guys who would seem to stack up, but I'm telling you, just having watched some of their blowout win in their last game against Oregon, who's the kid? Biddle from Oregon. He's a 7-footer, and he looks small next to Mara. I mean, he does, and it'll be interesting to see how Michigan State deals with them. I'll leave it at that. But I do think if they can play physically and they're allowed to play physically, 2 different things against him, you can make him uncomfortable still. It's just a question of whether they're able to or not.
Then we have Lazar Stefanovic, 6'7" senior, who is formerly from Utah. He's averaging 5.2 points a game, 1.7 rebounds a game, and it plays about 17 minutes, shooting 42, 35, and 94.
Yeah, he's one of the returnees who has seen his role reduced as they've added some guys to the mix. He was a much bigger part of a much worse team, frankly, last year. As you say, he plays first couple of years at Utah. He's finishing up at UCLA. Good shooter. 3-point shooting's maybe been a little below what they would have expected, but definitely a guy who in any given game can do some damage. And again, it's primarily going to come from outside the arc. That's mostly what he is.
9th player we mentioned is Trent Perry, highly regarded 6'4" freshman guard, averaging 4 points a game in about 12 minutes, shooting 35, 31, and 84.
Yeah, McDonald's All-American level player, very talented kid. I believe, if I remember correctly, he originally was committed to USC, and then when Andy Enfield left, reopened, ended up committing to UCLA. Local player, hasn't had exactly the kind of highly regarded guy. I think they expected the transition might be a little easier, but then again, they've had a guy like Sky Clark playing well. They haven't needed him as much. So he's been in a little more limited of a role, playing about 12 minutes a game, but there's a lot of potential here. I mean, certainly it wouldn't be shocking in any given game to see him bust out and have a double-digit scoring game, shoot efficiently, make plays for others. He's got that capability. He just hasn't done it very consistently yet.
And finally, with William Kyle, 6'9" junior transfer from South Dakota State, averaging 3.5 points a game, 2.3 rebounds a game, in 11 minutes, shooting 71% from the floor and only 36% from the line.
You know, it's funny because he came from South Dakota State, but he was actually a guy a lot of people were after in the portal. Very explosive, athletic, 6'9" guy who they thought could be a five-man. But I think what's happened is Bilodeau has been great since he came over from Oregon State. So that was one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Illy's been really good, which they expected, but maybe he's been even a little better than they thought. And then with Mara's emergence, there just aren't a lot of minutes there
Yeah.
for
Right.
him. But he is an explosive, athletic big man. So he too. It's just like when you start talking about, say a Carson Cooper at Michigan State. You look at the numbers, you say, well, there's not a ton of production here. But if you watch Michigan State, you know any given game that guy could do some real damage and make real contributions in a lot of different ways. Kyle's the same way.
So speaking of damage, who do you think Michigan State should focus on and keep in the gutter for the UCLA roster?
I'm going to go with Bilodeau and
Mm-hmm.
Paul because he's their leading scorer. But I also think he's the guy that maybe worries me the most. Although it is somewhat similar to Michigan State that any given night, it could be one of a number of guys. They don't have
Right.
quite the depth in that way that Michigan State does, where, 9 guys have let them scoring in a game. They don't have that. But there are several guys who could be the leading offensive producer in a given game, but I'm going to go with Bilodeau. The inside-outside scoring potential and the fact that he is the most consistent guy leads me to that choice.
So that brings us to the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. Friends of you in the Grand Rapids area, and that's a very large region, of course, including Kalamazoo and out to Lakeshore. They even clean the windows of the state capitol. So they can go anywhere. They do fantastic work cleaning the windows, both the interior, exterior, the screens, the sills, and it just prevents you from getting up on the ladder, especially this kind of weather. I mean, who wants to get up on a ladder anytime, but especially when it's cold and wet. So have those guys do it. They do fantastic work, super great professionals. They also do a lot of interior painting as well during the winter months. So I think you got another month or two. They can take care of that as well. So if you have trouble there, they can take care of it for you. The nice thing is you get 15% off as a listener of the show. So you just go to our support page at tffinots.com/support. Click on the link for the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids, and there you can get an estimate. Troy and his team will contact you, and you'll have some great people helping take care of you. Do it today. You'll be glad you did. I know my family was. All right. So in the contest of who cleans the glass best, currently you have the lead 10-7, Rod. You get to, well, actually, I picked first this time because I think you picked first last time. Well, I'd be remiss not to pick Kohler, so I'll pick with Kohler as my first pick.
I'm going to go big. I'm going to go with Zapala and Cooper. Reason being, I think this is a game where those guys are going to have to play substantial minutes. I don't. UCLA can go small ball, but I think the way Mara's been playing, I expect to see more of him. And I just think those guys are going to be on the floor a lot, so I'm going big.
Yeah. Well, I had a 1-game win streak that you broke, and so now you're still up 3, 10-7. I need to make this one count because now I guess the last game Kohler was enough to beat both those guys. And I agree with you that it's gonna be someone large. I actually would almost go with Fiddler, but I don't think he's gonna play enough minutes, and that's I think what limits him as far as his rebounding. So it's really comes down for me to Carr or Akins, and Carr had a very quiet rebounding day, I guess last game against USC. So maybe I'll just go with Carr, thinking he bounces back and gets a few more this time, and I think he'll play quite a few minutes as well.
Oh, I think he's going to play a lot. I
Yeah,
just rebounding stuff is just not there.
yeah. All right, so that brings us to 5 keys to the game brought to you Nudge Printing. If you want a really cool shirt that's really comfortable, like the one I got on right now, if you're watching on TV, it's a nice quarter zip, head on over to Nudge Printing at nudgeprinting.com. 20% off on your order if you type in Final Four just as one word into checkout. Gabe and Brittany are great Spartans. They have a great company based out of Portland, Michigan, where they put all this stuff together. Easy shipping, easy ordering process, and just a really wide selection of Spartan apparel, fat heads, little stickers for like your computer. They also have other schools available in the state of Michigan and elsewhere, and a couple other Big Ten schools, including the Hoosiers and the Hawkeyes. So head on over to Nudge Printing. You won't regret it. It's again it's favorite apparel for all our family members. My wife wears T-shirts from Nudge Printing anytime chance she has because they're so nice and soft. Most T-shirts are kind of I don't know what the term is. You probably know better than I do, Rod. But it's just not as soft and comfortable. They're sort of I don't want to say boxy. What's the term?
Boxy is the correct term.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. I guess I did know the term. Anyway, head over to Nudge Printing. You'll get really great stuff, and it's worth your time. So check it out, nudgeprinting.com. So the first key of the game is the bounce back. So obviously, Michigan State with its first loss of the season in the Big Ten, first loss since November. I mean, it's almost so long ago I couldn't even remember who they lost to. It was that long. Of course, it was Memphis before, but so how can they come back? This is a good test of, does this because it's a one game blip against USC, or is this going to be something that's going to, persist and make a difficult road trip and put a little pressure on them as they get back home, I suppose, if they were to lose this one as well.
Yeah, one way to go, but a loss here is not catastrophic. Not that I'm necessarily expecting one, but it's not. Uh, but you want to. It's again more than the result. It was just going back to USC. It wasn't so much they lost the game; they just didn't play well.
Yeah.
A lot of the things that have been staples they've relied on throughout the season were absent in that game, and so you want to see them do those things. It is entirely possible they can play a good game and still lose. The way UCLA's been shooting three, um, the potential they have from some guys in the paint, and the way they can force turnovers, you could play a solid game and still be on the short end of their building. That absolutely could happen. I am hoping and frankly expect in this one. I do not think they will play the same kind of basketball they did against USC. But I have faith in this team as a group that they will respond the right way. We'll see.
Yeah. I feel like we've generally seen them respond well to a problem they had in previous game. They usually get it cleaned up within a game or two. This is new in the sense that they've lost, and we haven't had to see them respond to this since a long time. But they did respond well to that Memphis game. They beat North Carolina. They've run off had run off 13 in a row since then. So the second key to the game is the boards. So this is a team that we thought was pretty solid and rebounding for most of the season. They, I would say the last, I don't know, what do you want to say, 6, 7, 8 games or so,
Yeah.
really kind of off and on as far as whether they're really good defensive rebounding or not. And that's the offensively rebounded. They seem to be pretty solid around 30 to 33 to 40% offensive rebounding rate, which is pretty good. It's the defensive end. They've just been really just kind of shaky.
Offensive rebounding has been consistent. It's the defensive rebounding where there's been trouble. Really, I would say since they got back in the Big Ten play, and it's been disappointing. On paper, this is a game Michigan State should have clear-cut advantage for both ends. No question. But USC was that way, and we saw what happened. It wasn't that they had a terrible 40 minutes in defensive rebounding, but at the beginning of the game, so say the first 5 minutes and the last 5 minutes, they could not get a defensive rebound to save their lives, and that really cost them. One of the things that led to that defeat. So they need a better effort at both ends for 40 minutes.
Third key to the game is turnovers. This is something that Michigan State's been relatively good at this season, although they didn't have a ton of turnovers against USC, 12. It's sort of like the border of problems. It was enough to cause a lot of trouble early in the game. And this is obviously Team UCLA that depends on turnovers. And so Michigan State has to be smart with the ball, obviously.
I think even more than the usual concern where, hey, we don't want to have pick sixes that allow them to get some offense generation.
Right.
More than that, it's just UCLA's basic MO defensively is they can stop you well if they're turning you over. If they're not, they're gonna struggle. And so it really is key that Michigan State be strong with the ball, being decisive in terms of their decision making. All those things need to show up. So it'll be a hell of a time for the guard play to really live up to the pavilion and its potential, and kind of lock that down.
So the fourth key of the game is downhill. This is something that Michigan State did not do real well against USC. Playing downhill, forcing the refs to blow the whistle. UCLA fouls a lot, as I mentioned, so it's clearly an opportunity here for Michigan State to get back sort of on the horse and get to the line a little bit more.
But both in terms of Michigan State kind of reestablishing its method of play, and then specific to this game, the fact that UCLA is so foul prone, I think you have to find ways to put them under pressure. Look, give USC credit. They played way above their heads defensively, way above what they've done over the course of the season. They had a lot to do with Michigan State not being able to get in the lane as consistently as we typically see. Um, will UCLA be able to do the same thing? We'll see. But I know that Michigan State's got to be able to be playing downhill in order to have a good chance to win.
And the fifth and final key to the game is Mara. He's a 7'3" Spaniard who has been played well of late. He's obviously a matchup issue potentially for Michigan State and presents challenges as far as how you defend him.
Look, he's not, at no point has he been their best player.
Right.
But I mention him because he does things, he presents some problems that if you are not playing him the way you need to, he can then become indefensible. You can't cover. If he's 5 feet away from the rim and he's getting the ball, it's kind of open at that point. You just got to pray he misses, and he doesn't miss those very often. So that's why and I also think his increased presence has also had something to do with the 3-point shooting being better, because teams are having to commit more bodies and more sets of eyes to that. And it's like we talked about with Desmond Claude in the second half yesterday. His counting numbers were not as good, but I still think the amount of attention he demanded from Michigan State did create better opportunities for teammates. So maybe they're a half second late in closing on Yates because they're paying so much attention to Claude. Mara, in a different way, is a very different kind of player, I think can have a similar effect. So I'm going to be interested to see how Michigan State approaches it. Do they double? Or are they going to rely on their bigs to just try and man up single coverage the way Michigan State historically has done it, and hope and rely on their strength keeping Mara from the spots he wants to get to? I think that's the key.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say I've watched a whole lot of UCLA basketball, but I imagine the tricky thing with him, of course, is ball screens where he starts rolling to the basket. You can't probably hedge as much as a big. You got to try and, because you're not going to be able to front him at 7'3". You have to get behind him to prevent him from like a clean run to the rim where it's a pass from the guard.
And he can do damage. I've seen him. He's far from the most mobile guy you'll see, but they can and do use him.
So obviously, Michigan State looking to get back on the winning road. This, of course, would be the tying win for Tom Izzo for Big Ten record to tie Bobby Knight's record for Big Ten wins, and it'd be kind of cool to do that in Pauley Pavilion, like one of those storied college basketball venues. And I don't think that's probably something that's on the mind of the players. I mean, I'm sure they all know and are aware, but it's probably not, especially after the loss, it's probably not quite as prominent.
Nowhere in the discussion. Guaranteed.
All right. So any further thoughts of this game coming up? Aside from the fact that I think we expect once again a pretty large Michigan State contingent. I don't know if it'd be more than it was at USC. I don't think it'd be as overwhelming as it was in USC, but they'll definitely be there.
Probably not, if for no other reason than UCLA will, I think, have a stronger turnout themselves in USC.
Yeah.
Look, we're recording this on Sunday. We were out today and saw some people in MSU shirts in Santa Monica. It's a presence here still. So I expect Michigan State to be very well represented.
Yeah, hopefully you're having some great time. Rod and I went and checked out the La Brea Tar Pits, which was interesting, to say the least. But it was a good time, and we'll be back in a couple days for Michigan State's game against UCLA. So until next time, the Final Four is not on the schedule. Go Green.